All right, this is our book club discussion.
Hi, I'm Brock.
I'm Jeff.
Ryan.
I'm Jake.
And we read David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell.
And David and Goliath, it started with the intro, and it told the story of David and Goliath about how Goliath was like this big, like giant, like almost unbeatable, but in the mind of all the people. And David was this small shepherd, but he was able to slingshot his rocks, and he defeated Goliath when he hit him in his head.
Yeah, and nobody wanted to go up against Goliath because obviously no one physically looks like they're capable of beating him.
It was almost as if you couldn't.
But David was pretty much the only one to have courage. They didn't really want David to go be the one who fought him, but since he's the only one who volunteered, they had to give him a shot.
David used his strengths against Goliath because Goliath wasn't big enough to have far away combat, and David was good at slinging the rock, so he was able to defeat Goliath, even though Goliath was much bigger than him and much stronger.
And obviously Goliath went into the battle with a mindset that he couldn't lose. So he kind of just went in with his ego and didn't have any recognition of the fact that David pretty much counters him because David's a slinger while Goliath is the infantryman, and we learned that the infantrymen are at a disadvantage against the slingers.
Plus, they're a lot slower because Goliath had 50 pounds of armor on him.
Yeah, it was like 100 pounds. It's
100
like
pounds?
6'9" or something.
Yeah.
So it'd be tough to beat him, but
Pretty much the most important thing to come away with is that David went in as an underdog, but he used his disadvantage to his advantage. So we talk about the desirable disadvantages and the fact that he's an underdog, and then that's talked about throughout the story. Pretty much the two themes that are talked about through every chapter, and obviously this is probably the most important chapter because it introduces the two important ideas.
Yeah, and almost every story can be related back to this idea about this desirable disadvantage.
this basically it's like the whole topic of using your disadvantage to your advantages and making the best out of it.
So in chapter 1, they talk about Ranadive and his basketball team, who was less talented and pretty much knew nothing about basketball
before.
So then
But yeah,
they knew going in, they're not going to beat anybody with classic basketball skills or any tactics. And that makes them have to figure out a new way to play basketball, which is the press.
Yeah, they used the full court press, and they used what their strengths were to, when the other teams were bigger and like stronger and better at basketball, like classic basketball, and then they were able to use their advantages, their like
Speed.
hard work, and just out thinking them and using their better tactics to beat the other teams.
Speed and
yeah,
stamina.
he grew up with different sports. Like he played, or I don't know if he played, but he did like cricket and soccer. So kind of got those ideas and used it in
Yeah,
basketball.
the idea of just soccer, just running constantly, whereas basketball, typically you just retreat after you score a basket, but these girls, they press the whole time, the whole game, and other teams were not used to playing that style of basketball, so they got frustrated and they couldn't handle the ball well and couldn't even inbound, he said. So they were able to just keep the score really low, and then when they did get the ball, they were pretty much already on their side, so they were able to score a basket much faster and much easier.
So Gladwell, he kind of writes the story in a different way. He introduces the idea of the chapter, which was about Ranadive's basketball team, and then he kind of interrupts it. He starts talking about countries at war and how that has to do with underdogs, and he says that small countries of 10% of the population of the countries, the larger countries are facing, they win 28.5% of the time, which, it's not good odds, but you would never think that a country with only 10% of the population would have any chance. So that shows how you can never count anybody out. And those odds increase even higher when you're using unconventional tactics. So it's the same idea, because the basketball team, they're using unconventional tactics, and countries at war, if they use different tactics, it's going to confuse the enemy or other basketball team. It doesn't matter. They're confusing the other team. You have to find a different way to win when you're an underdog.
And the same thing goes for David and Goliath, because David, like, no one was, Goliath was telling him to come here, and he was expecting him to just hand-to-hand combat, but David slung the rock at him, and it killed Goliath, because Goliath wasn't expecting that to happen.
Gladwell talks about how other teams, like every team has an opportunity to use a new tactic. Anybody can. Fordham used the full court press to defeat stronger teams, and obviously any country could try different warfare tactics.
Yeah, but it's hard to pull off.
Yeah, it takes more effort to
Yeah.
pull it off. So that's what separates underdogs from champions. The underdogs are willing to put in that extra effort.
Yeah, because they don't have what it takes to win, so they have to find other ways to do things to win and to succeed.
And usually the people that aren't the underdogs, they go in expecting to win and not really probably putting forth their full effort, because they think, oh, this will be easy, right? The other team's not that good. But then once the other team comes in and does something that they're not expecting, then they're completely thrown off, and it ends up hurting them a lot.
They believe they like no competition at all, so yeah, they're not even gonna try. So other teams come in with a different way of beating them.
So you see the Goliath, like, or the favorite would be like expecting to win, but the underdog would be they want to win, they want to win, but they don't, like, they're not expecting to win. They like strive to win, and they're putting in extra effort.
So he also talks about how usually a team would use a different tactic if they're desperate. No team that's the favorite would have to use these just weird tactics, but when you're desperate enough, you'll use it. And when people use these tactics, many people don't approve of it, which is why Ranadive's team, they stopped using the press, and that costed them the championship. They just abandoned what they were doing.
Yeah.
They had something going for them, and once they abandoned it, they lost every advantage they had, because they were never the better team, but they were the team that put in the extra effort, the team that tried something new.
And they outsmarted their opponents and used the different tactics that they would not have expected.
Should we move on to chapter 2?
So yeah, but like overall, Ranadive's team is like David, and then the other teams are Goliath. That's just yeah.
So chapter 2 is talking about Teresa de Brito and the idea of classes being bigger versus smaller, and which one is more effective, and then like at what point is too small and what point is too big, and like where's like the happy medium.
So most people think that the smaller class is better, but there really is no evidence that that's the case.
They're trying to find like if kids are getting more attention from their teachers, then they can become more like smarter.
But what they found out was that they reached a point where the classes got too small and there was too much focus on the kids, and there was just too much pressure. And they also, Gladwell also talked about one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. He was from Minneapolis, and he worked to get his money. He had like a business going when he was like just a kid, and he like worked hard to earn his money, and he taught himself like good values and like how to work hard. But then like he couldn't pass that on to his kids, because his kids were just born with that money. And like when like kids that are born into like poor like families, like it's not good. But you get them more money and it starts to get better conditions for them. But it reaches the point where that man in Hollywood, like he just had too much money. That's where it talked about the inverted U curve, where there was like something good and it would like improve the like situation, but they'll reach a point where it just started to harm as much as not enough of it was.
He says how it's all on a spectrum. You know, no one would want to grow up in poverty, and obviously that's not going to bring out good results. but it does teach hard work, and it does provide the want to make it out that maybe somebody who doesn't have to struggle as much isn't gonna have. So when you have that, there comes a point where there's too much and too little, and that point is where you want to be.
You just want to be in like the happy medium.
I feel like
at the very peak of that curve.
if you're like wealthier, you like feel like you're just gonna get stuff handed to you.
Yeah.
'Cause, like
Mhm.
And when things start to go wrong, you don't know how to like handle it
yeah,
because it's never
Yeah.
happened
the
to you
stress
before.
or like you know,
Yeah.
like what actual hard work is.
I think there's two sides to that. Like if you grow up in poverty, there's pretty much two choices. You can either work hard to get out of it and work hard to get money, or you can just like kind of give up and just not do anything.
Yeah, because you're an underdog, and obviously, not every underdog wins. It's the underdogs that have that mentality and that want to win.
Extra drive.
Mm-hmm. Gladwell does say that the number where the income doesn't help you anymore is 75,000. So like, once you pass that, you're not really providing much more. You have everything you need, and you're kind of just piling on top. But if you go below that, that's when you might not have everything you need. So if you can find that point, and it's not like every kid is gonna follow that rule. Some people have different mentalities, but that's just how it typically is.
That honestly, 75,000 seems pretty low to me, because 75,000 family income is really not that much. So, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I didn't do the research, but like 75,000 seems like it's kind of a low number.
Yeah.
And that's all.
Well, it's still enough
that's like
to pass
Yeah,
one
whole
person.
family
Yeah.
income.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He also brings up the point that working class people, they can't afford something. So maybe a kid wants something, they can't get it.
Yeah, but they're gonna have to work for it.
Yeah. The people with the money,
The kids don't have to work for it.
even
Everything's
if-
handed to them.
even if they don't get it, they still know that they can get it. And that's kind of what separates them. Like,
Yeah.
they know that they want to strive to be at that point where they can have something.
It's back to like David and Goliath, because like Goliath, like he's expecting to win. Like the people with money, like they can just expect things to like come to them, but with like the lower like the income, like you have to actually work for things. And like David was able to like work and like outsmart and like think and like work for himself to better himself to beat Goliath.
Alright, do you guys want to move on? Another one?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
chapter 3 with Caroline Sachs. So, it's introduced about Caroline Sachs and her college, and it talks about that, and then
Well, yeah, she's always just been successful like her whole life, but then she chose to be the small fish in like a big pond where
yeah,
everyone in that big pond was like
Very
equal
smart.
to her or like better than her, and it just brought her like self-esteem like down, and she was just
yeah,
She was comparing herself to these
Yeah.
other students that just like were just way smarter than her.
When she was in high school, she was used to being the big fish in the little pond. She was always top of her class, always like didn't have to work super hard, and she was
Yeah,
just
which
like
would have
pretty
happened
much
if she
smarter.
went to Maryland.
Pretty much
Which would
smarter
be the
than
same
everyone else.
option.
Yeah, she chose Harvard, which normally people would think, oh, going to the more prestige college will lead to more success. And I mean, sometimes that is the case if you're super smart. But even in her case, she was still super smart. But when she got to Harvard, she realized she wasn't
I
as
think it
smart.
was-
She went to Brown.
yeah, it was Brown. They're both prestigious
Yeah,
schools.
they're very prestigious. Well, yeah, they also did a bunch of studies on Harvard and later in the chapter.
Yeah.
But he also talked about like the painters and how they would be in like that they would put their works in like the salon
Big show, yeah.
in the big show, and you want to be either be like one of like the little like arts and like all like that very good, but then some of the other artists such as I think it was who was it. Whoever they were, they made their own show, and they chose to be like the bigger fish in like their own little pond.
Yeah, and all the other artists at that time, like all the people that bought the art too, thought there's no way you're gonna sell your paintings without going to the salon, because that's like where everybody wants to be. But they realized that just holding their own thing could display more of their own artwork, and people came to see it, and they ended up being really successful in selling their paintings.
So Caroline Sachs, she still was more gifted than everybody, or most people, not everybody.
Yeah.
So she went from the high school where she was more successful for
Yeah.
everyone. In college, she was much.
Yeah.
She was
But she
superior to others.
She compared herself
Yeah.
to everyone else that was like above her, equal to her.
Yeah, because she
And
was
didn't-
surrounded by all
Yeah, she
people
was-
who
yeah.
were great. But if she, on the big scale, when it comes to like every college, she was still greater. But
Yeah.
when you're around people who are like that, it does bring your
Yeah.
esteem down.
So that's what forced her to drop out,
So, yeah.
because she was just wasn't able to keep up with everyone.
Like high school
Ended up hurting.
doesn't.
Yeah.
High school doesn't always have like the smartest people, but like if you're going to Harvard, you know it's gonna be
Yeah.
like really a lot of competition between who's the smartest.
Yeah, later on in the chapter when it talked about like Stanford, the students publishing their journals and stuff like that, like only the top % of students at Stanford actually were able to publish their journals, whereas like some of the smaller schools that like the non-top 30, like University of Toronto and Boston, even if you weren't like super high, like 99th percentile, like even the 90th and the 95th, they were still able to publish more journals than the non-top class at Stanford.
Yeah, the term for her situation is relative deprivation. So that just has to deal with how you judge yourself around people, even though if it's not entirely true, but the people around you are going to typically be the people you compare yourself against, which you shouldn't be comparing yourself against the people immediately around you. Because when it comes to everybody, she is a better student and performs better. But, you know, people, that's human nature to compare yourself to people around you. Another interesting thing was that the bottom third of Harvard, they actually earned higher scores than the top third at Hartwick. Only 15.4% of Harvard's bottom third graduated STEM courses, which was less than Hartwick. So that shows the people at Harvard are smarter than the smaller, less prestigious schools.
Yeah, but they all compare themselves to the
Exactly.
other kids. Yeah.
And that means that since the people in the smaller pond, they're gaining confidence and they're not comparing themselves. They're finding more success, even though they're not better.
See, they don't have like the prestigious or like the name of like the big pond, the big school, but they still they stay in their respective field. It says that more than half of all American students who start out in science drop out after the first or second year. But the kids that stay in there stay in science. That's what they want to do. They're happy with that. But the kids that choose to be in like the big pond and like they got like the big name, they're going to Brown, they end up dropping out because they can't handle it.
That's kind of crazy to think about. All these kids that go to a prestigious school are super smart, and more than half of them drop out. That's kind of a crazy thing to think about.
Yeah.
The big idea I got from it was people discount the value of turning away things considered advantageous. So people, they don't realize what they're getting when they don't receive the greatest. Maybe it's for the better. Is that about it for that chapter?
Yeah. So,
So that brings us to chapter 4.
David Boys. Boys?
I don't know. I'm not good at pronouncing names. So he was the one with dyslexia. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Obviously, dyslexia.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want dyslexia, but
Yep, but it taught him like
Mhm.
how to work, like the David thing, like how he's disadvantaged. He can't read, but he learns different
Yeah.
ways and is
desirable
develop,
difficulties.
Skills
Yeah.
that maybe some person that doesn't have to go through the struggles of not
Yeah.
learning at some
he becomes a very successful
Yeah.
lawyer because he's able to like outthink and he sees like little details.
Develop skills,
Yeah.
like
That's
listening
another,
to people and like picking up on the tone of their voice and stuff that
Yeah.
the average person who doesn't have dyslexia
Yeah.
probably wouldn't hear when listening.
Because
But
it just comes naturally.
yeah,
So this
He
is
has
like
to
a,
work and like outthink and outsmart and just work harder.
it's like a scenario of using your disadvantages to your advantage. How he just has dyslexia, but he's able to do different things because of it.
Yeah, so he obviously couldn't use his disadvantage, so he had to use what he had, which
Yeah.
was being able to excel when it came to hearing and on-spot thinking. Because he can't write stuff down, he can't do that. He's gonna, instead of suffering from obvious failure in the future, he's gonna change what he does to find success, even if it's something that not everyone does. That's what underdogs have to do. They have to find a new way to win. He also talks about disagreeability, and it's an important trait to successful people. People need to be willing to go a different route. They see it necessary. If they don't agree with something, they have to have the courage to disagree with it and do something different, which is what the IKEA founder did. People didn't really think of selling disassembled furniture as something you should do, but he believed he should, and people also didn't think that moving to Poland for his company was the right thing to do. But he had that disagreeability, and that made him successful because he trusted his instincts.
He's willing to do
Yeah.
whatever it took to make his company successful, and it ended up working. And he became very successful at what he did. Sold a lot of furniture and outsold a lot of the competitors, doing something that they all thought was not something he shouldn't have done.
He also talks about Gary Cohn. He had dyslexia, and people who struggle, they have nothing to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
That made him
Like, yeah,
get in the
nothing to
cab
lose,
and
yeah,
try to
so-
get a job on Wall Street.
Something
Yeah,
that
when people
most
have nothing
people-
to lose, they'll do anything
I don't know, I
to
would
win.
want
'Cause,
to
like,
do something like that, like just
Yeah,
fake. He's
Exactly.
basically fake it till you make it, because he had to go through the struggle
Yeah.
of, as a kid, like faking knowing how to read and stuff like that. Even though he couldn't, he didn't want to get
Yeah.
made fun of, because so he would act like he knew how to read when in reality it was really hard for him. But then when he got to the subway station, or the taxi cab, he basically faked knowing all this stuff, which is something that
Yeah.
most people would be
yep.
horrified to
it
do.
said
But
he said he read the one book like that one weekend before he started his job, and he was able to comprehend that book, like just pay so much attention to detail and just
He was so
Memorize.
used to failure that he wasn't afraid
Yeah.
anymore. He
But-
was willing
but
to
he
do
was-
anything
yeah,
for
but-
success.
he wasn't afraid, but he was also good at like figuring out ways
Hmm.
to just like defy
Yeah,
the
because-
odds and like be like
Yeah, the underdogs
better.
have to figure out a new way to find success,
yeah.
and that's what separates them.
Mhm.
We then go to chapter 5. With
Jay
email Jay.
Freyrich.
This was
So, Email's father committed suicide after the 1929 stock market crash,
Yeah.
and pretty much the only person he really had was
made.
his maid
Yeah.
or the nanny.
Was that because that was because his mom was like?
Yeah, his
Yeah.
mom was always working, and then when she got a new husband and they fired the nanny, he didn't have anybody,
Mhm.
and that he had so much pain growing up.
Yeah.
He had to block it out. He had to block out all his painful memories, and he says he can barely even remember anything.
Yeah, that was confusing to me. Like even if she was like, he said like that was like his mother, but like he couldn't even remember her name.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah.
just I
that
don't
shows just how
know.
bad
Yeah.
it must have been.
Yeah. But it
Pretty
also
sad.
taught him like, I mean, he just all that pain. He just nothing to lose.
Yeah.
and just to do whatever it is and be different. And
So that's like the recurring theme of this whole book is just when you have nothing to lose, you do anything you can.
yeah, same thing. That's what it started with David and Goliath.
Yeah.
Like David did whatever he could to not lose, and he defeated Goliath.
Then the story switches to talking about the bombing of London in World War II. And it talks about remote misses and direct hits and how that relates to people in real life. The people who are direct hits are the people who are killed, but then the people who are remote misses, they aren't affected by it.
Yeah.
But that allows them to become.
Yeah,
They have that new mentality. Like, they think they're unbeatable, so they think that bombing them is going to bring down their morale, but it actually brings it up because these people now think that they're stronger than they actually are, even though they weren't directly affected by the bombing. They think that they outstrengthed it.
yeah, but
Yeah. They
the
saw
near
some-
miss is just ruin like the people. They're
They
just
saw some of the devastation that it had, but the remote misses, they thought, oh, there's all these bombings, and guess what? We're still here. We're still doing well, and they were able to
Yeah.
build up a lot of confidence and basically think they're invincible, which sometimes could hurt you, but it ended up actually helping them because the bombings didn't have the effect that the Germans thought they would, and did the exact opposite.
So he looked up to his doctor who saved his life, and that made him want to become a doctor, and that made him tell himself he would never let anybody die.
yeah, and he was able to use like different strategies to cure leukemia and like do different things because
He studied like drugs and different things.
he was just experimenting because
Something that everybody told him not to do. He
yeah
wanted to try, and he, like you said, he has nothing to lose, so
because
He was willing to try.
he was brought up in like adversity, so he's able to just like
He's used to it,
just used to it like
he's used to that.
Because no one would hope to have the childhood of him, but it might have actually helped
Yeah.
him, and he says that because of it, he's never been depressed or hopeless throughout his career. And because he's like a remote miss, he's actually able to be okay from it and use it to help him.
Because if it would have been a near miss, he would have never accomplished anything. He would have just been like destroyed by his like
Terrified.
terrible childhood.
Yeah.
He would never be able to do anything. But the remote miss, he can do anything, and he was able to save so many lives.
Gladwell says that courage is what you get from tough times, and then you discover that they weren't too much of tough times after all.
Yeah.
And he talks about Fred Shuttles, who was the black preacher in Alabama, and he had the plan to ride the segregated buses. The KKK bombed his house, and he survived. Became even tougher because of it. But then he feels like he's bigger than life. He thinks he can't be defeated, and he takes his daughter to enroll in an all-white school where he's beat. He survives again, gets even more confidence. He's even more courageous. And those tough things he went through built his courage.
And he can't lose because like he's been people have tried to like defeat him, and he can't like be defeated. So he just doesn't think he can. So he's nothing to lose. He can do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
All right.
we just go on to the next chapter.
Yep.
So it's about Wyatt Walker, the Wabbit.
It starts off with this black teen who just like a police dog who's attacking him. And they show a picture in the book.
And he's just standing there taking it.
Yeah.
That kind of showed how presumably evil they were and how they were being treated horribly and they talk about the trickster rabbit and these cultures. They kind of have to learn to be tricky, and that's what they use as underdogs. They use trickery to defeat their oppressors. They have to outsmart.
They use kids in like their rallies and
Yeah.
stuff.
Because
they
this
what
is
people weren't gonna expect.
Yeah, it's another desirable difficulty.
Yeah.
So Wyatt Walker worked with MLK to push against segregation. They kind of set him up to play the rare rabbit or the trickster, and they got what they wanted. And MLK didn't want to do something that would test his morality, but Walker was, and that allowed him to assemble the large protests to fill the jails. But those didn't even work. 22 protesters showed up, but they gave it enough time for people to come outside, and it made it look like the protests were much larger.
It perceived that there was all these people when in reality there's only 24 people actually protesting, or the other people there just as onlookers. But the way it was perceived is that all these people were here to protest, which is just like this picture of the person. When you read later on the story, he was actually knocking the dog away from him. The dogs weren't even attacking him at all. He was trying to get the dogs away, and the dog ended up with a broken jaw. So the picture was perceived that these dogs were just attacking this innocent man, and he was just standing there taking it. But in reality, the man was taking down the dog. But it was perceived that he was being attacked, and it led a lot of people to side with the protesters.
And the whole like civil rights movement, they had like they wanted freedom like so bad, like they would do anything.
They were willing
for
to
it.
sacrifice
Yeah,
anything.
they had nothing to lose. Like it's just every all these stories, like all these people have nothing to lose, and they'll do whatever it takes to win. While like all the other like big like powerful like whoever's like the Goliath, like they're just gonna.
They don't expect to lose.
Yeah, they don't expect to lose. But then the David is gonna just try so much harder and like the will to win.
Yeah.
More.
All these scenarios, it's just there's the underdog who just has nothing to lose and just wants to come out on top and win.
Yeah.
All right,
Part 3: The limits of power.
Chapter 7. So Rosemary Lawler is a Catholic in Ireland, and they were being oppressed, and they had to move neighborhoods, and she heard a call out of a neighborhood that was in trouble, and they were being held under curfew. That was the neighborhood Lower Falls, and that allows Gladwell to talk about how people in power don't need to worry about how the people they control feel about them. They just need to respond with force when the people start going against them. And in Ireland, they handle the conflict by trying to teach the people a lesson to not do it again. And then he says classrooms are similar because people think of authority as like a teacher as response to disobedience, and it's actually inversed, as sometimes disobedience is response to authority. It also talks about the principle of legitimacy, and that people only take order if they feel they have a voice, and if they feel that what they're doing is fair, and then the people in charge actually care about them.
I like the part of the chapter, like, where they were talking about, like, all the juveniles in Brownsville, and, like, when they put in a new police force, instead of just, you know, traditionally just going out and arresting all these kids, they, Jaffe, she began to, like, kind of try and be more involved in the community and help out these families. Like, when she took them Thanksgiving dinner and, like, Christmas presents and stuff, she was able to help out these kids because some of them didn't have a great family life, and like providing them with these things were able to get them off the streets. And
I think it says something
And they
like
started
taking
to
them back
respect
school.
their like authority. And,
yeah,
like,
instead of just they had the mentality that like they would just stay away from the police. Like
like
just
they're bad.
wanna,
Like we don't
take
want
you
to
to
like
jail.
associate with them.
Instead they
And
try
then
to
they get
help
out of
them.
jail and they do more crime. But now they like respect the officers and they'll
They show that they care about
they'll
them.
behave more. Yeah.
They didn't believe that the officers cared about them before.
Yeah,
And
which is why they don't respect
Yeah,
them.
which
and they
shows
don't,
how the statement earlier was wrong, that the oppressors only have to care about a response. They don't actually have to care about the people, which is untrue after all.
Yeah, after Jeff and her team were there, the crime rates dropped an immense amount, and like even from 1 year prior to 1 year after their program, it went down from near 400 all the way down to less than 50 robbery arrests in a year, which is insane.
Yeah.
They talk about how the Catholics knew that the British Army was Protestant and they should be looking for them for help and for them to be saved, but they don't believe that they're actually there to help them. So that shows again how the way that they perceive these people is important. They didn't want them to protect them. They didn't trust them.
Yeah. Once they like trust and respect them, they understand like, wow, they care about me.
And then their general, he doesn't enforce law in the fair way, and he shows how he's biased against Catholics. And he meets the resistance with force, which resulted in 25 deaths. And then eventually the Protestants fight, or the Catholics fight back against the British Army, and the Catholics actually end up winning.
Yeah, they were able to use a diversion by sending all the women in and trying to send them food, but they were actually able to sneak out the guns and some of the weapons.
Yeah,
Help defeat them.
like underdogs, they had to find a new way.
Yeah.
And obviously the favorites didn't think too much of it.
They're expecting to win. They're expecting just underdogs, not to be any of them.
Should we go on to the next one?
Yeah, that's it. I think we should move on.
So the next one was about the daughter who was shot. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And then the father made the
The three strikes.
three strike
rule.
Which
and that
ended
just
up
like
not really working.
yeah.
Yeah, because of
The intentions were like to
Yeah.
keep the criminals off the streets, like so they don't have another chance of doing something bad again.
which it seemed like it was working at first because like the repeat offenders were able to stay behind bars, but then when they actually looked at it,
Yeah,
Like-
like the time like the third strike was like
Yeah,
like four.
you just-
I think it was 43.
yeah,
Was the average age of the third strike.
and by then the
Yeah.
people aren't as likely to commit the bad crimes as near as likely as they are like when they're in their 20s. And a couple of times it talked about the one guy that his like third strike was just something like super simple, and like he shouldn't have been locked up for the rest of his life for, but because of the ruling,
Stole pizza.
yeah, oh yeah, that's what it was.
That kind of brings back the inverted U, or curve, the inverted U. and how there comes a point where
Yeah.
more punishment doesn't help anymore.
Yeah, and it actually starts to like cause more harm because it's putting people away that shouldn't really be putting away.
Because there's still people out there having knowledge that there's punishment stops some crime, but there's still people who are not concerned with the punishment, and saying jail for life doesn't have any effect on them.
Yeah.
And yeah, most crime is committed by young people, so locking them up when they're older isn't doing much to help anybody. People who grow up with a parent in prison are 4 times more likely to end up in prison, and coming back from prison is bad for the kids because of the strain from prison.
Yeah. And then those kids are more likely to do crime.
Yeah.
And there's just a repeating cycle.
Exactly. If 2% of a neighborhood goes to prison, crime rates reverse statistically. Crime rates falling is not correlated to the 3 strikes law, because California has since returned to their original system.
And the next part of the chapter was like the Dirksons.
Yeah.
I don't know, she was more like the forgiving person instead of.
Yeah. And she didn't like.
Yeah.
I don't want to say she didn't care as much, but she wasn't as angry.
Yeah.
She was a lot more
They
forgiving.
thought that forgiveness was more progressive than more punishment, and that allowed them to live their lives like they did before. They still had the loss of the daughter, but it was less of a strain on them than the people who have resent and hate for the murderer of their child, and they live with that in their head forever, and they never get over it, and they can never live their life
Yeah, they can't
without
live in
thinking
peace.
of it.
But the Dirksons, they can live and they can like live like lead a normal life. So yeah, somewhat.
Yeah. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
That brings us to the final chapter.
Andre.
Yeah, Andre trusts me. And he's the pastor.
Yeah, this is going on around the time of World War II when Hitler was trying to kind of take the Jews and I don't know how you say his name, Andre. He took in a lot of the Jewish refugees, even though he was not a Jewish pastor, and a lot of people wouldn't think to do that, but he did. And he was willing to help all these people.
They were the only city in France who didn't follow the orders and the agenda of the Nazi puppet government that took over in France. And that city was called like Chambon sur Lignon. And yeah, Andre Trosme was the man leading them, and he encouraged them to not follow orders, because why would they be following orders of horrible people?
Yeah, like for Goliath, like they're expecting everyone to like do what they want, and they're gonna beat them, and then when they like do different tactics, and
he went against it and was able to save
they
tons of lives.
Yeah.
And they said they had to do things differently, like they made like the fake ID things, and and even when the pastor got caught, he was willing to just take the punishment and accept responsibility because he had already saved all the people. So
and
he
his
was happy
courage
for his cause.
His courage is caused by the loss of his mother, and he had to commit his life to God, and he was disadvantaged. But that allowed him to have the courage to go against the evil puppet government. Unlike any other, no one else had the courage to do that. No one else.
He had nothing to lose. Like
he wasn't afraid of punishment.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid of the punishment. His only goal was to save the people, and that's all he did. He was able to do that. He didn't care what happened to him.
Yeah, which is just being like not selfish.
And I think that's one of the more like important moving chapters of the book.
Yeah.
Everyone knows about how horrible World War II was and everything that happened in the Holocaust. And that really just shows that's like a perfect resemblance of David in his courage, and he didn't care what everyone thought would happen. He did what he knew he had to as an underdog and as someone who was disadvantaged his whole life, and that allowed him to help a lot of people
And succeed in what people thought he wouldn't succeed doing.
So every story, like all these underdogs, they all like worked harder and use different ideas and
have
just
something in common, like that was a disadvantage, could be looked at as a disadvantage, but
they use that as an advantage for themselves. They use it as motivation.
all those things ended up helping them to get where they wanted to in life and ended up being successful.
Accomplish the things they wanted to do.
Yeah, I thought the book had really good ideas, more moving ideas than most books.
Yeah.
Probably one of the more influential books.
Well, that's because it gathered all these stories.
Yeah.
That,
A lot of
But
important
they all
stuff.
they all focused around the one central idea of just
Because
the
a lot of
story
people,
of David and Goliath.
a lot of people, if they're at a disadvantage, they think they're like they have no chance to get to where they want to be. But this just shows that if you are willing to work hard and sacrifice the things you have to, that even with the disadvantage, you can still be really successful and still accomplish
So
whatever you want.
This book like reaches out to readers. Like the reading is to get motivation to work hard and become successful.
And everyone can gather something from this. Like one of the stories they can like relate to.
Yeah, whether they're the underdogs or if they're the people who are the favorites, who maybe should consider an underdog more.
And how
more
like, the underdogs are gonna like want to win more and strive harder,
have more of a drive and more determination.
Teaches people like you're not better than anyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyone can beat anyone. Anyone can do anything that they want.
Yeah, it also you can look at it that way too. Even if you're not the underdog, you still have to. You may think that this will be easy, like if in a baseball game or something like that. If you're expected to win, like it's not just going to be a walk in the park because the other team could do something that you're not expecting and end up beating you. So you can't have a big head on your shoulders and just expect to win.
I think that's pretty much it for the book.
I'm Brock.
Alright,
Thanks for watching.
goodbye.
Thanks for watching.